There is no feeling like giving your best and still falling short of your goals. It makes you feel like you're not good enough and you wasted your time. Failing feels bad, but without the fear of failing, there can't be any sense of achievement. Failing means you have to improve to overcome your obstacles. It means you have to question yourself on your mistakes and find a way to fix them. There's value in failing. It gives people a goal, reasons to improve, and once they finally get past a huge obstacle, a feeling of accomplishment. In the early stages of gaming, most games only give you a couple of lives to finish a whole game before completely wiping your progress. Games were punishing and made sure you perfectly mastered them before giving you the satisfaction of seeing the credits roll. However, this trend fell out over the years. Repeating sections you have already beaten doesn't feel meaningful at some point because there are no more challenges or interesting idea the game can throw at you. Getting back to the point where you failed can end up feeling like a chore, a pointless requirement to get back to the interesting parts. Taken to the extreme, this would be similar to asking you to repeat first grade math because you failed 7th grade algebra. Losing progress has an important purpose, but the loss of progress must be proportional to the mistakes made. While games nowadays are on average much easier than in the early days of gaming, there are still a lot of games that rely on their difficulty to make players feel accomplished. Here I could talk about Celeste, with its short bursts of highly technical sections and quick respawn times that always keep you in the action. In Celeste, the player is expected to die multiple times before being able to get past an obstacle, but by keeping the punishment for dying extremely low, the player is empowered to try again and again. The feeling of accomplishment for getting past an obstacle is still there, but without punishment, there's no lasting feeling of failure. I could also talk about Dark Souls, with its brutally long sections that reward your consistency and test your endurance. Each section is designed to be a slow methodical crawl where any enemy could surprise you and take you down. In Dark Souls, no victory can be attributed to random luck because of the number of different situations you need to master to progress. The punishment for losing is high, but because the game requires so much from you, reaching each checkpoint feels like a huge accomplishment. Even though Dark Souls is known for how difficult and punishing it is, there are still some games out there that are far more punishing because they don't give you a second chance, and that means you have to restart from the beginning. This is better known as the concept of permadeath. Permadeath means that when you die, all your progress is wiped clean. Any item you collected, any money you earned, any upgrade you made is lost. Like in classic games, you must restart from the beginning and redo everything you've done to get back to where you failed. And as I said before, losing your progress can lead to a repetitive and seemingly pointless experience. But there's a genre of game that manages to make it work in a satisfying way. Roguelikes. Roguelikes are games with permadeath where every run of the game is completely different thanks to randomly generated elements. Usually this means that the level layout, the enemies, your equipment, and your upgrades are randomized. This changes the game from learning how to beat a level to mastering the game mechanics and adapting to new situations. Because every run is different, you can't just learn how to beat a single section. You need to learn how the game works on a deeper level if you want to consistently make progress. And the fact that everything is randomized thanks to random number generation, or RNG, makes sure that every run is unique and feels fresh. It gives you a reason to come back because you want to see what the game is going to throw at you next. A good roguelike will even hint at new items, upgrades, or powerful synergy you could get to make you want to see them in action. For example, in the deck building roguelike Spire, there is a card that gives you 3 shivs, low damage cards that can be easily spammed against enemies. And after a couple of runs through the game, you will unlock Accuracy, a card which effectively doubles the base damage of your shivs. The game gives you instinctive combos that make you want to come back to try them out. So, while the punishment for dying in roguelikes is really high due to permadeath, the game makes it far more interesting because of how different every run is going to be. But while randomly generated elements give players reason to come back, this is probably not enough to make death feel satisfying. In fact, it might even make death feel worse because you're not perfectly in control of your run. If RNG is too important, you might feel like you didn't lose because of your skills, or lack thereof. But instead you lost because their RNG gods weren't in your favor. No matter how interesting each run is, if you die to something you couldn't prepare for and you end up losing hours of progress, you're probably entitled to some frustration. Making a satisfying death is not about giving the players reasons to come back. It's about making the player feel like their mistakes were preventable. A satisfying death has to let players stay in control, has to be fair, and has to be framed in a way that keeps them engaged. One of the key factors in giving players control is to give them a lot of meaningful decisions. This is important because it lessens the impact of RNG and let players choose how they want to play. It makes them balance what's better for them and what they can get away with. A lot of the decision making in roguelikes comes back to figuring out how much safety you need to progress and how much you need to invest in the long run. Should you buy additional health to be able to enter a couple more hits, or should you buy an item that gives you immediate power? Or maybe you should buy an item that might be an hindrance for now, but will make you significantly stronger in the late game. For example, in the roguelike dungeon crawler Binding of Isaac, upon meeting certain conditions the game will offer you devil deals. These devil deals offer you some powerful items at the cost of maximum health. These items make you stronger in the long run, but they also make the game a lot less safe. This is what high risk, high reward decisions are. They are about getting as much power as possible while not pushing you so far that you lose. They force you to adapt on the fly to new things and figure out how to fit in what you're trying to accomplish. This is fun because it creates a sort of self-correcting meta where you're always close to that no matter how comfortable you are with the game. If you're really used to the game, you can take more of these dangerous items and know that death is always at your doorstep. If you're less comfortable, you take less of these and can keep playing safely. You're not as powerful in the long run, of course, but you can take more hits and have more opportunities to learn. Because roguelikes make all your decisions matter so much in the long run, the fun is not only in the moment-to-moment gameplay, but also in adapting, testing your limits, and theory crafting. This way, the early levels of roguelikes are not just about reaching the next section, they are about setting you up for the next ones. Thanks to decision making, there's a clear reason why you lost, and your failure is not only due to bad RNG. Maybe you took too much safety and ended up without enough damage to clear enemies. Maybe you took too much early power that didn't scale properly into the late game. Learning what works in which situations is part of what keeps the game interesting and encourages players to try new things. Of course, no matter how much control you have over your death, this doesn't come close to being as important as making the game feel fair and just. Indeed, if a game is too difficult, it could lead a lot of players away before they even get comfortable with the game mechanics. Even if everything is entirely possible, some level of difficulty might seem impossible for new players and might make them feel like the game is unfair. Keeping these feelings to a minimum is super important to retain new players and be able to gradually introduce them to everything the game has to offer. To solve this issue, Megacrit, the developers of Spire, introduced into their game the concept of Ascensions levels. Ascension levels are an optional difficulty setting that is unlocked by beating the game and make the game incrementally harder by reducing healing, changing enemy movesets, and making other small changes. This makes sure that new players face a more reasonable level of challenge, they get a time to get used to the game mechanics, they have small goals to work toward, and they can feel their own improvement. This mechanic helps to make sure the difficulty curve is smooth and steadily goes up. Making a good difficulty curve is the core of game balance. And there's another kind of balance that's also really important in roguelikes. And I'm talking here about balancing your RNG. Make RNG too weak and it doesn't matter anymore. Every run ends up feeling the same, and you end up with that feeling of repetitiveness that I've talked about. Make RNG too strong, and players will end up feeling like they lost because they were unlucky, and not because they lacked the skills to win. Something that seems to work in a lot of games to balance for the worst possible scenario. The worst possible run should still feel fair and beatable. Your worst run should be your base level and what you can expect to happen. The good runs should still be frequent to give players a sense of being unstoppable and being really strong, but they shouldn't be so frequent and game-breaking that players rely on them to progress. This is something that Enter the Gungeon, a twin-stick bullet hell from the studio Dodge Roll, does well. In Enter the Gungeon, you're more likely to get lower quality items at the start of the game and to get higher quality items at the end of the game. Also, they somewhat limit the number of high-quality items you'll encounter to prevent you from destroying the difficulty curve. The game is balanced with the idea that you'll get lower quality chests most of the time, but importantly, it still has a good chance to give you a great item early on. In this way, a run where you get an incredible item early on will feel amazing and rare. On the other side of the coin, even on your worst run you won't feel like you're losing so much power that you can't win, and you'll most likely get something good later on. To prevent a game from feeling unfair, most roguelikes make failure a result of multiple small mistakes instead of a single one. This comes back to the idea of proportionality. There's no small mistake that can be proportional to losing multiple hours of progress. The loss is gradual to give you a fighting chance, an opportunity to stop the bleeding and fix your problems before they become overwhelming. Roguelikes rarely give you all your resources back and instead prefer to patch you up a bit here and there. By giving you some resources back over time, they reward your consistency and make sure that all mistakes have a consequence. But even when deaths appear unfair, developers found ways to frame that as part of the experience and not as a big deal. For example, letting the players respawn instantly upon dying can keep the players in action and let them also forget that it happened. The game doesn't make a big deal out of dying. It doesn't flash big red letters that say, "You died." It moves on and makes it easier for the player to move on too. And there are only few games that nailed this as well as Spelunky, Derek's new roguelike platformer about, well, spelunking. Spelunky is a ridiculously punishing game where even after playing perfectly for multiple hours, a single mistake could destroy your whole run. Deaths in Spelunky are often characterized as unfair, and yet I can't help but smile and laugh at them most of the time. Spelunky is a sort of Rube Goldberg machine aspect to some deaths. You throw something to kill an enemy, this proceeds to make him fall down and anger a shopkeeper or trigger a trap, and suddenly you're being thrown at every single corner of your screen. Everything goes down in an instant by simple logical interactions, and seeing it all work together is an experience in itself. The ridiculousness of the death just makes it so much easier to laugh at it and start another run. In the words of Derek Hughes himself, "One of the things I wanted to do with Spelunky was to make it feel okay to die. And that's built a little bit into the humor of the game. You die, and it's funny when that happens. It's supposed to be a little more light-hearted. I just wanted to make dying feel like a part of everyday life. In Spelunky, you should feel free to experiment and not feel bad about dying." So that's why deaths in roguelikes are satisfying and fun. They give players control thanks to a focus on decision making. They make deaths fair by having good balance and by making every mistake count. And finally, they frame that in a way as to not aggravate the player. Add to that the infinite possibilities of RNG, and you have games that make you want to come back and improve. Obviously, not all games respect these ideas, and sometimes not adhering to them is part of the intention and part of the fun. There are tons of ideas that you can find in roguelikes that make that feel fun that I didn't even talk about here. Like preventing grinding to keep the decision-making process pure, or creating a narrative around the cycle of death. Before leaving, I want to say that I love roguelikes, and I believe there's a certain stigma toward them in most online discussions. They're really divisive because of their usually high difficulty, and some players might dismiss a game altogether just because it's a roguelike and they don't like the concept of permadeath. But I believe that with the wide genres of roguelikes now available, there's something for everyone in there. Roguelikes only describe a progression system built on permadeath and randomly generated content. They are usually not what makes the moment-to-moment gameplay fun. But being a roguelike let developers improve that gameplay by letting them explore more ideas and create more small, focused, and unique experiences. So that's all I have for you today. My name's GS, this was Game Design Corner, thanks for watching.